Hablo despacio, pero en inglés. The left-wing philosophy and politics has been with us for a long time, but I want to say the left that we face today, this generation, is not the same as the left from 50 years ago or from 100 years ago. There has been a major shift in the philosophy, a major shift in the strategy. So now we talk about the postmodern left as opposed to the modern left. Now the whole story is not politics, but politics is important. There's been an intellectual revolution in some parts of the humanities, spreading over into the social sciences, and this shift has been of a significant enough nature that we say we've broken in those segments from modernism to postmodernism. Now, I want to say initially then, what do we mean by postmodernism? So here is Michel Foucault, perhaps the most famous of all of the postmodern thinkers, and he is using a metaphor here, a geology metaphor, right, arguing that we have undergone an earthquake intellectually, culturally, and as with an earthquake, huge destruction, huge devastation has occurred. But as a result of that earthquake, we can now see deep into the earth, to the foundations. The different strata have been revealed. And that is what has occurred in particularly Western civilization. Richard Rorty, American postmodernist, also talking about the world historical significance of this revolution. And notice the time span he talks about. We, postmoderns now, what we are trying to figure out in our generation is, what are we supposed to do now that the age of faith, 1,000 years of Western history, from fall of the Roman Empire to early modernity, Protestant Reformation, Renaissance, that was a failure. Then, the 400 or 500 years since then, the entire modern world, which was capstone with the Enlightenment, we became enlightened, that also, according to Rorty, has been a failure. And the point the postmoderns are making is that 1,500 years of civilization is wrong. We have been on the wrong track. And the postmoderns are identifying that as a fundamentally flawed way of thinking about the world, a fundamentally flawed set of institutions, and they are reacting against that and wanting to replace it with something else. Now, what is this Enlightenment project? This is essentially the modern world. I've got some timeline here. We go back to the 1600s. Major thinkers, Francis Bacon, John Locke, René Descartes, figures we recognize from our philosophy courses and intellectual history. And they are revolutionary in the 1600s, arguing for the importance of reason, empirical methods, developing data, becoming better at mathematics, not relying on faith, mystical revelation, and the mere fact that there are traditions that are in place. We will think and think for ourselves and get the data and do the arguments. That's an intellectual revolution. It's not an accident that in the next generations we can see modern science starting to develop in physics, in chemistry, mathematics becoming more sophisticated, biology becoming more sophisticated, and the important names Isaac Newton, Gottfried Leibniz, and dozens of others. As the scientific revolution takes place in the late 1600s into the 1700s, we see an engineering revolution, and the Industrial Revolution in the middle part of the 1700s starts to transform how we think about engineering and the production of material goods. When we start thinking about human beings more scientifically and getting away from magical and supernatural understandings of what makes us sick, medicine is transformed. Edward Jenner with vaccinations, medical chemistry, the empirical approaches to figuring out what actually makes people sick. Now, this story we know, as a result, the engineering, a huge explosion in the amount of material goods that are available to people. More things, better quality, better prices. Everybody can afford to get most things. Health starts to go up. Life expectancy increases dramatically starting in the 1700s on into the 1800s. And so people are living better. But equally important was a revolution as a result of modern philosophy in the value branches, in ethics, because everybody, the early moderns argued, had the capacity for reason, to think, to look at the world, to make their own judgments, to govern their own lives. As a result of that, we see a rise of individualism. We have to respect each individual's own judgment, their own pursuits, their own values, and then as a result of that, liberalism starts to come into place, and we see revolutions all over places where this Enlightenment revolution is occurring. The Glorious Revolution in England, the American Revolution, the French Revolution. It's not an accident that they are all happening going in the direction of political liberalism in the same century. That we're going to leave individuals free in their own lives, to let them participate in the political process. We are not going to have kings and queens and authorities who have power over us. And the same thing happens in the economic realm. A revolution, Adam Smith published in 1776 on the Wealth of Nations, the same year Thomas Jefferson is writing the Declaration of Independence. That is not a coincidence. In the economic sphere, we can leave individuals free to decide their own productive measures, to be consumers, to trade with whomever they want, to have individual property rights and so forth. So we have revolutions politically, people become more free. Revolutions economically, people become more wealthy. We add that there's more things available and people are living longer. For the first time in human history, around the late 1700s, early 1800s, the idea that people should be happy, that they should be able to make progress in their lives, that when I start as a young person, by the time I am older, I should be able to improve my condition, and that should be normal, not an accident, that I can make the world better for my children and that they will make the world better for their children, and we will be able, with this Enlightenment philosophy, solve all problems. Very optimistic view. Now this is what the postmoderns are saying has been a fraud, has been a failure. This is the modern intellectual project put into practice. They believe now, 2 centuries later, it has been a fraud. So Foucault, for example, attacking right here about reason. Well, the moderns think, right, that they have reason on their side, that we have figured out certain very important truths. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And that we, as a result of science and engineering and knowledge, we now know certain things that are very important. One part of postmodernism is a strong skepticism that came out of philosophy, and all of the postmoderns believe that the claims of reason, the claims of logic, the claims that we can somehow know the truth have been revealed to be a fraud. There is no such thing. This is a very strong claim. And one of the things we know that is characteristic of postmodernism, particularly on the left, is its critical skepticism of any claim that is put forth. If we don't think that there is reason, if we don't think it's about truth and knowledge, well then what are we doing? Really, all that's left with is, if there is no reason and truth governing the world, is power. And here's Franklin Tricchia, as a professor, saying explicitly, postmodernism, right, seeks not to find the foundation and the conditions of truth. We are no longer interested in truth. We don't think that is possible. What we are interested in then is power. Power for the purpose of social change. Now the modernists are interested in power, power for the purpose of social change, but in the interest of truth and justice and the pursuit of knowledge. But we are not doing that anymore. So what you do then as a professor is you don't train individuals to think for themselves, to be aware that the world is complicated and that they need to look at arguments on both or all sides of the debate and trust their individual judgment. Instead, you believe, you have your beliefs, your agenda. Your job as a professor, when you have power, is to basically indoctrinate your students to believe what you believe and to get them to become social activists. One's task as a professor is to help students spot, confront, and work against the political horrors of one's time. The Enlightenment said we are making the world a better place. The postmoderns reject all of that. The world is horrible, and the job of the professor is to teach the horribleness of the world and turn students into activists who will be against the current system. Men and women, the Enlightenment had said they should have equal rights, equal liberties, and part of the modern project has been to extend the franchise, extend education. Men and women, of course, have some differences, vive la différence, but basically their relationship is a win-win, mutually beneficial, mutual care, and so forth. The postmoderns are arguing there is no such thing. That also, that optimistic view of human relations is a fraud. It is about power. Males have more power. They use it to advance their own interests against women. So in her postmodern phase, here's I suppose you know this word, right? Normal fuck, right? By a normal man, right, is predation. Right? So there's no happy, there's no romance. This is not win-win. This is not progress. This is caveman, but we're being brutally honest about that fact. So hence the adversarialism, men versus women, that some forms of postmodern feminism take. So it's not that we're interested in working with men for mutual interests and mutual respect. We believe it is a battle, and we are just taking up the battle on the other side of the equation. Same thing applies then in foreign policy. Jean-Francois Lyotard, one of the major postmodern thinkers, arguing in the international scene, we Western liberals, we moderns, we believe in truth, justice, liberty for the whole world. We're interested in exporting liberalism and tolerance and human rights everywhere. The argument is that is a fraud, a cover. That's a cover story. Really what's going on is the rich countries, the powerful countries are just interested in advancing their interests, and the weaker countries in the world have all kinds of problems. In this case, he's talking about Saddam Hussein, the brutal dictator in Iraq before he was deposed, and the argument is he was not a bad guy in the sense of being a homegrown bad dictator. Instead, the fault belongs to the rich countries, the United States and the others, for creating the conditions in which a dictator like Hussein would arise. And we see the other names up there. It's the same thing. Hitler was not a homegrown problem for the Germans. The problem was what the rich Western nations did to Germany. Franco, what the Western nations did to Spain, and so forth. And Jacques Derrida, a quotation here, significant, just the number of times Marxism recognized here, while much of postmodernism is sometimes pitched as being not political. Right? Derrida and the others pay explicit acknowledgement to their roots in Marxism, and that's going to be the main focus for the rest of my remarks here today. Deconstruction, that's a literary method that the postmoderns use, but notice what he's saying is basically applied Marxism. Now what that means, hard story. But the idea is we're against reason. We know postmoderns divide people into groups that are in conflict with each other, so it's not this mutually beneficial trade that capitalism promises. It's not this optimistic liberalism that we think politically is going to come about. We know that they are suspicious of science, suspicious of the Industrial Revolution, and this is a harder sell here, but there's postmodern applications to medicine that are rather stark, but we will set those aside. The idea that we are making progress, the postmoderns reject that in their entirety. The whole project is a fraud from their perspective. Now this is a philosophical battle, and I want to point out these are the most influential four postmodern thinkers: Jean-Francois Lyotard, Michel Foucault, Richard Rorty, Jacques Derrida, 3 Frenchmen and 1 American. All of them are PhDs. And the important thing is that all of them are PhDs in philosophy specifically, all of them writing their PhD dissertations in theories of knowledge, theories of epistemology. Philosophy was at a very skeptical, relativistic, subjectivistic place in the middle part of the 20th century. And an important part of postmodernism is that epistemological, knowledge-based skepticism and a rejection of the claims of reason, truth, scientific method, and so forth. That is important. But I want to say the politics is equally important. And here, if you look at the political views of all 4 of them, it's not a coincidence that